Hi, Frank. How are you doing today? Welcome back. Another episode.
Hey, thank you. We're back at it.
Back here, yeah. Back inside, even though it's a beautiful day out today, the day after the board meeting. And I don't know about you, but this warm weather has me thinking about summer. And something that I heard from someone who moved up from Southern California at one point. In Oregon, you have to be really ready for summer to take advantage of it. And so it's not quite summer yet, but what's your favorite summer activity?
Well, first of all, I'm a summer person. It's my favorite time of year. I grew up here, of course, but then I lived in Southern California, spent a lot of time in temperatures north of 110. So after a while, you get used to that. I don't think I quite thaw out until it reaches 90. So, but my wife's much different than that, so we have to compromise. In the summer, love to paddleboard. It's probably my favorite outdoor activity. Just lakes, rivers, kayaking, paddleboarding, biking, all those things outside. Gardening, we mentioned that last time, actually, just working in the yard, doing basically mindless work. It's something different than work, and so I think that's a mental break also. But, well, how about you? This is fair play. I can ask questions.
Yeah, hiking is my go-to summer activity. Biking, especially mountain biking. I know some people are into it, but it just terrifies me. So,
and in the summer, my dad and I used to race up Spencer's Butte. So on foot. We would figure out what our best time was. We would. I don't remember at this point how fast we could get up there, but we would race to the top of Spencer Butte on a pretty regular basis. I'm not in that kind of shape now.
You still get to the top, just not as swiftly.
That's correct.
Okay. Well, today's the day after the board meeting, and we can perhaps continue, in a sense, our discussion from last time when we were talking about the Bonneville product decision. That was a big topic last night with the board. They had a conversation about the leading products, and we talked about that last week. And you presented your initial leaning between these two products that we could get from Bonneville. What was that?
Yeah, it was, I think, important to provide a little bit of context around that. The initial leaning was to go with what's called a load-following product. The load-following product is more of a full-service product from Bonneville at the tier 1 or at cost level. We have such an opportunity in the Northwest with a federal resource like Bonneville Markets to be able to leverage that, and in particular the capacity that offers at cost utilities like eWeb. In that initial leaning that we think that's the best product option, we also have to recognize that that is at a net level, so there's a contract limit to what that amount of energy and capacity is that Bonneville can supply at cost. We will have needs beyond that, and by leveraging the federal resource for that, it gives us a real intentional opportunity to look at the non-federal resource management, our customer programs, and some of these other things in a lot more intentional and strategic way. So a little bit of it was just leveraging the fact that we have a great resource at cost that we probably can't compete with at the levels that they're talking about, but also giving us opportunity to focus on where we can add the most value for our customers, which is some of these other areas. And so was a choice between two good choices. The total worth of those is somewhere in the $2.5 billion range over the life of the contract. So it seems like a big, impactful decision. However, when you're choosing between two good choices, the differences there being, I'll say a few $100 million. It sounds like a lot, but over the course of the contract, there's things that we can manage in those differences. And so that's the initial leaning. We have a couple of other upcoming milestones. We have another meeting with the board the third week in June. That'll be to kind of refine that and say, does this, after you dive into that a little bit more as you go, we have a community table coming up. We'll talk with members of the community about that. And then we'll go back to the board in June with, yeah, we think this has moved from a leaning to our recommendation. And ultimately in July, the board will pass a resolution authorizing the organization to go make it happen, basically.
Yeah. Well, and commissioners, what was their general reaction last night to the leaning?
I think that their reaction really was, they're intrigued. They're engaged. They have, through the course of the last 2 years, received bits and pieces of information about Bonneville. There's a lot to digest there. Most of the interactions were around clarifying questions. For example, we have some very specific guidance that the board has provided around environmental attributes of our generating resources and the energy that we supply, and how does this decision impact some of those things. So they're very engaged. I think ultimately they're going to be supportive of the direction that we take, mostly because I think that we're trying to approach this in a way that recognizes and highlights the trade-offs. They talked a lot about the different trade-offs between the two choices, and felt they were very engaged, but they've been engaged now for a while, so I don't really know whether that was a big surprise to them one way or the other. I think we had narrowed it down to these two good choices, and it may foster a few more questions over the next couple of months.
Yeah. Well, and so this is like you said, more than $2 billion decision. It feels very weighty, but for customers, what would this mean for customers? Because it's also kind of a bit of inside baseball.
Yeah, so first of all, the Bonneville contract is a substantial amount of our resource costs. Mm-hmm. It's about 80% right now of our total portfolio. At least roughly about 50% of an electric bill has to do with what we're paying for energy, part of that a significant part through Bonneville. We think it mitigates the important costs of capacity going forward, which is how you meet your peak demand, and Bonneville will play a role in that and really leverage their scale for that. On the other hand, I think it was pointed out last night by Brian Booth that independent of the product decision, we do expect resource costs to increase over time. Many of the same inflationary pressures, environmental, regulatory pressures that we feel ourselves under for generation are also impacting Bonneville. And so we do expect energy costs, a lot also because of supply and demand in the market, in the wholesale markets, to continue to increase. But this is really an opportunity because it's at cost. Yeah. So it's not driven by market demand, it's driven by, you have an at-cost basis to start from. So I wouldn't expect, this contract takes effect in late 2028. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't expect the day after the contract takes place that you'll see a dramatic shift in pricing one way or the other if you're a customer. But I think it really sets us up in the long term to keep those under control and add value where we think we can add the most value.
Yeah, and then similar, question for the organization itself, for eWeb, how would this choice impact us?
Yeah, I think there's one of the criteria for, I'll say, selecting a load following product over the other product, which was Block with shaping and some other services, is that it really will help the organization focus. Mm-hmm. Leveraging Bonneville's scale at the base load level at cost really allows us to take a step back and say, how are we going to manage the non-federal resources? How are we going to manage our own resources? When I say manage, how do we deal with the sort of the ups and downs, the balancing of those resources? How do we really align our customer programs to take advantage of avoided future costs? What does that look like? It really helps the organization focus. How we do that, there's some decisions upcoming as to how we want to look at resources beyond base load. That's kind of a decision later for this year, and that has impacts on, for example, how we manage the portfolio pretty significantly. Mm-hmm. And what the boundaries are around those costs. So those decisions we'll make later this year. Yeah, I think it really has some advantages about, you kind of build a foundational corner, and then it allows you to add value beyond that, and that's how I feel about this one.
Yeah, and then last question here on this topic: is there how are we going to manage that change? Is there going to be a team that works on it, or just how do we kind of manage into that new future?
Yeah, I think that some of how we manage it will depend on this sort of secondary decision around how we want to handle non-federal resources, and our role in managing that could be greater or more depending on the outcome of that decision. Again, that'll be later this year. But we also know that there's some period of time, this contract doesn't take effect until 2028. Our present construct is in existence until then. There's a lot of expertise that we have built up as an organization around managing resources, not just at the wholesale and balancing piece of that when we have deficits or surplus, but also managing our own generating resources to optimize those. So those are all things that we'll have to look at. And it could be we have to manage more or less change depending on how we do that. And really those changes designed to create opportunities for people in our community and to leverage the value and expertise that we have. And so we'll see where that falls. But first decisions first, and the Bonneville piece is first, and then that is a decision around non-federal resources we want to make this year. So that it won't be too long after the Bonneville decision. In fact, we'll probably still be negotiating contracts with Bonneville when we're in process of analyzing and looking at that secondary decision around non-federal resources.
Yeah, but one step at a time.
One step at a time, yeah.
Okay. Well, what is a team or an individual that you want to recognize for some of their work or efforts in the past month or so?
But I almost have to go back through my notes because you ask me this every time, and I've gone through several different departments. So I have to fall back on a question or a comment that I actually received the other day from a fellow general manager that I meet with pretty regularly. And he made a comment about how nice our fleet is. And so I wanted to really recognize our fleet department for how they manage the fleet in general. So first of all, there's always trade-offs between when do you buy a new one, when do you look at the maintenance of an existing resource, an asset. There's that trade-off, but also just the fact that we have a skilled group that manages these assets, makes sure that they're in good working order, safe, their lifetime is protected. So I guess this month, I'll acknowledge the fleet department based on comments I get from other utilities and admiration for the fact that we have such a great, in this case, rolling fleet, but there's also other portions of fleet. But acknowledge that group, they do a great job.
Yeah. Well, thank you for appearing today on the show, and maybe we'll see you climbing up Spencer Butte in the month ahead.
Could be. I'll be a little slower. Just not going to be racing up there, but yeah, certainly want to see people out and about this time of year. It's a great time to be out. So.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.